So thank you very much for joining us today at this live webinar and live pre-chat. It's like we're in the green room together as well. I'm Ade Clewlow. I'm a senior client advisor in NCC Group. And with me today is Lyn Webb, the CISO at the Open University. And unusually, normally I would introduce the our panelists, but I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves today for a change. So Lyn, would you like to just do a brief intro of who you are?
Thanks, Ade. Yeah, hi. As Ade mentioned, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the Open University. I've been there for just over a year, arrived 2 weeks before lockdown, so that presented interesting challenges. And I was also the first person in that role, so there hadn't been a CISO at the OU before. There'd just been a very small team. Prior to that, I was in consulting at one of the big four for 6 years, and then prior to that I was in the military.
Great, thanks very much, Lyn. Also with me is Jonathan Slater, co-founder at Capslock, which is an organization that helps adults reskill into cybersecurity. Hopefully I've got that right, Jonathan, and please introduce.
Yeah, absolutely correct. So I'll introduce myself. So graduated in nuclear engineering back in 2014, but always been very entrepreneurial, from making and selling hair ties back at university to pay for my nights out, through to eventually founding Capslock 10 years later. Ideally to plug the cybersecurity skills gap, the diversity gap, and enable people to reskill into a fruitful career as we move further into a digital age. But yeah, excited to be here.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. And finally, I'm joined by my colleague here at NCC Group, David Orr, who heads up our managed services team. David, over to you.
Thanks, Ade. So hi everyone, David Orr. I'm the head of managed services for the UK element of NCC Group. What that means is I look after the SOC, and I manage the relationship with our customers as well. And our SOC provides managed detection and response services to an array of customers across a whole load of sectors. In terms of my background, I've been with the company about 3 years. Before that, also ex-military. I was in the army for around 20 years, doing primarily communications, but the last couple of years I moved into cyber.
Fantastic, thanks, David. And so I'm sure those of you who have joined, looking at the topic of today's discussion and the 3 questions that we're going to attempt to answer, I think each one would be a subject in its own right for a 45-minute podcast or webinar, to be completely honest. And perhaps that's something that we will look at doing in the future, and really deep diving into the subject. But for this particular webinar, we're looking at these 3 broad themes. Are we doing enough to meet the skills shortage in cyber? Are we doing enough to attract a diverse and inclusive workforce into the sector, and how do we project ourselves externally? And how do we make our people more capable in the oft quoted role that they serve, which is that people are the first and last line of defense in cybersecurity? And so we'll be getting a little bit into that subject towards the end. So fascinating subject, and one that I think affects all of us in very different ways. I have a feeling that we're going to have quite a lot of Q&A interaction today. So if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A. If you want to make a comment in the chat, by all means, go ahead. And as we go through, I'll try and bring some of those questions into the discussion. So I think we'll go straight into the first question. Jonathan is going to lead us off. So the question is, do we need greater systemic change, potentially through government intervention, to plug the skills gap, or is our industry, doing enough already? So Jonathan, you've got a really unique and interesting viewpoint, and so over to you.
No, thank you very much. Great question. Excited to answer it. So I'll kick off firstly, sort of explaining what we're doing right now, I suppose, as a nation to tackle the cybersecurity skills gap. So last year, around 600 apprenticeships, about 3,000 UK cybersecurity graduates, but overall the industry is growing by 10-12% year on year in terms of headcount, and we need around 7,000, 8,000 new employees every year. So there is a gap there. It does exist. We're not here to debate if it exists or not, but I'll kick off in terms of, do we need more government intervention? It kind of makes me a bit nervous, Ade, to be honest, for a couple of reasons and a couple of stories. So not too long ago, the government created a panel or a committee to try and tackle the cobblers skills gap with Timpsons. They spent 2 years and £2 million creating a cobblers MVQ. And then 2 years later, 3 people enrolled onto that course, and that was it. So in terms of getting the government involved, a little bit nervous. So back in 2017, there was a cyber reskilling academy, £1.2 million was spent, 50 people reskilled, probably not the best value for money there. And they've also tried the Cyber Skills Immediate Impact Fund as well, which was, well, Hacker House, there's some stories there, Bojo's Best Mate and all that good stuff. So I don't think government alone is the answer. I definitely think the private sector needs to take more responsibility. So initiatives like Capslock, obviously, but also employers as well. NCC Group, to plug you guys whilst I'm on your webinar, do a great job of getting early stage talent into the industry, opening doors, and also with a focus on diversity as well recently, which is really good to see. So I think some of the challenges come from, if you think about the public and private sector, as a private organization, for example, the top 20 CIS controls were changed a couple of weeks ago. The very next day, our curriculum's updated and is on trend. Whereas I think we have a really unique insight from Lyn in terms of working for the Open University in the public sector, of how universities or those in higher education might struggle to keep up with the pace of change. And not innovate as quickly as an institution like Capslock. So definitely think the private sector needs to do more, but definitely a bit nervous about government intervening.
So, I mean, can I just come back to you before we bring anybody else in though? So obviously we've got a range of frameworks, cybersecurity frameworks, skills frameworks, a range of standards. You could, if you were being a bit cynical, you could describe it as a bit of an alphabet soup out there.
Yeah.
And now we're about to have the UK Cybersecurity Council. It's appointing its first CEO as we speak. They featured on Cyber UK. The chair of the trustees was talking about what the umbrella organisation is going to achieve. Surely there is a role for government to be providing some sort of framework against which everybody can then reference what they're doing individually, because different businesses are all grappling with these same issues, and therefore surely a degree of, and I'm not saying the UK Cybersecurity Council will achieve this, but surely a degree of consistency and alignment would be a good thing for the entire industry, wouldn't it?
It would be ideal, wouldn't it? I think, if you look at examples like CyBOK and, the cybersecurity body of knowledge, which was created sort of like the UK's version of NIST NICE over in the States, amazing idea, took a long time to put together, but the result we've got is a sort of 860-page document, which is very text heavy and hard to use. And the UK Cyber Council, as great as the idea is, I don't know how long the roadmaps have been going to create this, but now it's sort of almost there. We've had conversations, but again, the pace at which you can get involved, the UK council is pretty limited. So we're, at Capslock, we've got sort of the output of maybe 3 or 4 universities worth of cybersecurity graduates in our first year, and we haven't had to rely on any sort of government initiatives, etc. I really, sorry to absolutely beat down on them, but I really struggle to get on board with their ability to react to the pace of our industry. I really do.
So and well said from a true entrepreneur, I think. There. But Lyn, your background is really interesting, because you've gone from sort of establishment, if you like, to leading cybersecurity consultancy environments, where you will have seen pretty much everything in your time there. And now you're kind of on the other side of the house, and you're in academia, and you're in a really unique academic environment. It must be, you must also be feeling a little bit like you need a bit of support from somewhere. And how do you approach that, the fact that there is such an obvious skills gap?
I think I mean, I think the government can do something, but I think it's different from what it's done, what it's been doing now. And if I sort of reflect on it, it's the industry in cyber in particular is seen as a new industry, and I think there's this kind of approach which tries to create a kind of cradle to grave pipeline, if you like, of skilled professionals without really looking at the root cause. And so I think whilst there are initiatives at schools where it's more likely to appear on the curriculum, I think there's something around where security sits, or cyber in particular sits as a core skill in the same way that maths and English might sit in the UK. And I think there's something that the government might be able to do around that. And I don't have children who are going and living and breathing that at the moment, but I feel that there's something about educating the general public from the moment they start walking into a primary school, and because it then becomes about them as a person and equipping them in a core skill that will work. And then in the same way that some people who end up very good at English or very good at maths might then go forward in careers that need that kind of natural or innate skill, that it will then help us grow. And so I feel that some of the government initiatives to date have been around building frameworks, and it's more a kind of you will comply, and therefore we need people who understand that, and those people are going to get employed in the industry. I think it's more about now that softer kind of people being our weakness. Let's make us all stronger as cyber. Let's make it part of our personal attributes in the same way that we might be able to speak a language or understand a mathematical equation. What is that baseline? That's where I would like to see the government sort of come in, because I think you're right. I've seen it from lots of different angles now, and I think what I've realised is I kind of came from the military, not in a cyber role, not in an information security role, but because I was a member of the military, security was sort of embedded in my DNA from the moment I started my training, and I never questioned the fact that my job had to be done securely. That's kind of what we want for the general public, and I'm not suggesting everyone joins the military, but so I've kind of come that full circle, and I'm now, as you say, in the academic environment and working with a lot of people that are trying to unpick this. So that's where I would see the government fitting in more in the kind of early education process to create a greater awareness. I think it's happening a little bit, but I would like to see it more actively happening.
So I mean that's a great sort of lead to David, because I do want to ask your views on this, David, because you have school age kids, and but this is not just a national issue. This is a global issue. The complex nature of life that we live in and the workplace is not going to get any less technical than it is today. Therefore, surely we need to be building a much greater kind of foundation of technical skills from which they can people can then choose which direction they want to go. But I mean, do you get a sense from your own experience now of that there is that emphasis, or are we still completely missing it in junior, sort of in lower schooling years?
It's a great point. I think Lynn's point's excellent. The way I would look at it is, if you choose to be a journalist, the point at which you learn English isn't the point at which you start trying to train to be a journalist. You were doing that from the beginning. And I think it is critical that we embed the ethos, the culture, the vocabulary of computing, frankly, and security, and those coupled together from the very earliest age. And it has been interesting. You think certainly going back a few years, computing when it was taught in school was all about, how do you use it? How do you use Word? How do you use PowerPoint? All that kind of stuff. And that actually probably should be taken as read, and that should just be integrated across the curriculum. That's just an enabler. The bit that is the subject is how it all works. It's coding. It's the fundamentals. That's the groundwork. That's the foundation that needs to be in place. And I would absolutely welcome a move in the national curriculum even more towards that. And I think that would give our children the language and the culture around this subject that's going to allow them to succeed. I think it's interesting, you know, we talk about the skills gap, and I get that this isn't a universal experience, but certainly where I feel that the skills gap is not at the senior end. We can generally bring in senior people and find them, and that's great, and you know, no real problem there. Nor is it necessarily at real entry level. People that are coming with almost, you know, very entry level skills or very low skills, but are willing to work and work up. It's the bit in the middle. It's the people that have got 3-4 years experience, and experience rather than skills is critical here. That is difficult. And so much so that we probably get most of our talent at that level now by growing our own. And I think, in my team anyway, and I think that is a great way to go, because actually you get to shape the individual, embed them, immerse them in the world that is your organization. So they're learning how to be not just a cybersecurity specialist, but a cybersecurity specialist, analyst, engineer, intelligence analyst in your company.
Jonathan, you are directly involved in attracting people into the cybersecurity industry from people who have already chosen careers or have found themselves going down a particular path. Are you finding that you're having to work quite hard to attract those people? And if you are, you know, what are the reasons for that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we're coming from the opposite end. So both Lyn and David touched there from early stage careers, you know, from sort of year 5 onwards, etc. But we're looking at sort of the other end in terms of professionals out in the UK workforce now who are, you know, faced with career redundancy due to the nature of the economy moving into a more tech-focused economy. So in terms of trying to attract talent to Capslock, to retrain, to reskill into cyber, it's not been too difficult, to be fair. There's real strong demand from our customers, from our consumers to come in and reskill. I think the challenge for us is being able to find the people who will be successful in cybersecurity as a sector. And what we've done is sort of change the admissions process in terms of we don't look at A levels or past history. What we do is judge people on their current competency and their future potential to learn. And I think David touched on that at NCC Group. The appetite to learn, the willingness to get involved is the absolute #1 driver in cyber right now, because you've got to be on your toes at all times. So finding people with that aptitude, willingness to learn has been the challenge for us, and we've been pretty good at it so far. So, you know, 80 adults enrolled, average age of 36, just absolutely hitting the ground running. They've been absolutely superb. And I think, you know, you think of the university graduates right now, their average age of, you know, 21 to 24 when they graduate. Our average age is 36, so they can come in and plug that skills gap, which was mentioned about the communication skills gap, turning technical language into something other people can understand, and understanding how risk can fit into the business and how cybersecurity affects the wider business organization as well.
So without even knowing it, you've shifted the conversation perfectly into what we want to sort of look at, I guess, now and in this evolving discussion, which is if we're trying to do that, if we're trying to achieve what you're achieving, Jonathan, but also, you know, multiple by thousands across the UK, does the cybersecurity industry present itself in the right way to attract diverse talent, or even talent in the first place, or enough talent, sorry, in the first place? And if not, is, you know, what is our role in trying to change the perception of this? And actually, maybe if I can turn to you, Lyn, to answer that question, because I think it is all about how we are perceived externally. And I think sometimes how cybersecurity is perceived is just a total blocker for people, because I think it's way too complex and it's not for me, but actually it is.
Yeah, I agree, Ade, and I love the fact, Jonathan, that you're focusing less on qualifications and it's all about potential, because I think that's a huge step forward. So I don't think the industry presents itself particularly well at the moment. I don't think it's moved forward from the degree in computer science being essential and the ability to kind of, you know, write code. Because I think that is part of it, but I think that it's such a broad spectrum these days that and I just don't think that gets reflected. I think you know, when I kind of started out in cyber, and I sort of moved into I started off in the crisis management field and broader resilience, and did a bit around physical security and personnel security, very kind of natural leap from the military, I guess. But very quickly, the thing that most of our clients where I used to work were worried about, the threat that concerned them was obviously cyber, which is where my move took place, I guess. And actually, the industry as a whole is broad. You know, on one side of the spectrum, you've got people who understand about how you embed security into a strategy. They need to understand the business, and you know, that's a real growth area. You know, what does, you know, so at the university, for example, you know, one of my aims has been not only to demonstrate that the university has you know, is a great place to learn online, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever your backgrounds, that kind of open concept, but actually we need to reassure everybody that we can do it, they can do it safely, so they can collaborate in this virtual world safely and securely. And so security then gets embedded in. That's not necessarily a technical side of the industry. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you know, you've got probably people that work, you know, in David's area, in the SOC environment, who absolutely need to understand some of the details. And then in the middle, you've got the people who are who are understanding the architecture of the system. They understand, you know, where all the different interfaces might be, and they start to talk a language that you know, I can understand. And then I think overall, you know, the industry, a big part of it is the industry's ability to communicate with the business, and the business are our kind of customers. So I think the university, I think the industry is still branding itself technically. I think if you look at job descriptions, I think for me, they are usually a list of impossible qualifications. Often, you know, that person that has got all of those qualifications, just, I can't imagine they'd ever exist. Otherwise, they'd just been spending their entire time studying. I mean, it's shocking. So I think we have to do that, and I think we do, as people who are in the industry, have a big role to play. So I think attracting diverse talent has got to start with the brand of the industry. And I suppose what I'm sort of saying in summary is it's way too narrow, and it hasn't moved on. Those requirements still exist, but actually it's there are add-ons about people who are good under pressure in the incident response world, you know, leadership, people who can communicate with the board, people who understand risk, you know, because I think, and then there's also a real role for people to play about who understand the great products, but it's about joining all that up. And I'd love to see a stronger narrative, and then I think we would appeal to a much more diverse pool of people, not just, you know, specific types of diversity, but diversity of thought, you know, real innovators, you know, people who can see us get to a new phase, you know, a new stage, and bring in things like AI and bring in machine learning. So yeah, my simple answer is no, but obviously I've summarized that with much more detail.
It's funny you just use that phrase, diversity of thought, because in my, you know, a couple of notes I've written diversity of thought next to Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, and if anybody hasn't read that book, I absolutely recommend that you read it, because it really emphasizes that point that having a diverse workforce can bring so many benefits. And this isn't new, of course, this has been talked about for years, and right across industry and business. David, you've got quite a diverse group of people who work with you, and that you've been recruiting over the last couple of years. I mean, can you just talk through a little bit of, you know, some of the sort of challenges, I guess, that you've faced in not only you know, trying to get the right technical skills, but just about the kind of people who are replying to your adverts, and, you know, just give us a sense of what's actually happening now.
So I think I'd start by saying not diverse enough, but by a long way. I mean, we've worked hard, but ultimately you can only select people to work from you from the candidates that apply. And that is too narrow. And just to pick up on some of the previous points, I think we as an industry or a sector are still very guilty of being quite cliquey. And I think you can see that if you go to one of the many conferences that happen, cyber conferences, and there are lots of them. You know, people tend to look the same. People all know each other because it's not a big community actually. So they all huddle in groups, and actually to an outsider looking at that coming along, it looks pretty impenetrable. If you look at LinkedIn and you look at people that are in the industry, that looks pretty impenetrable too, because it's alphabet soup after everyone's name of the qualifications and the badges that they've collected. And as we've said, I'm not necessarily sure that's always helpful, because give me someone passionate and experienced over somebody with lots of badges any day. So I think we definitely have an image problem, and it is difficult to see exactly how we shake that off. Then picking up on the diversity of thought, and I think that's the one we want to go for, because actually that solves all the other problems. If you've got people that think in different ways, see the world in different ways, then straight away you're cutting across gender, and you're cutting across race, and you're cutting across all the other categories of diversity that you want to embrace. And there's no question. There's no question that we do. And I think it's interesting in the way that a clique looks impenetrable to the outsider. That gives the impression it's quite hostile. And if you pick individuals from inside that organization or inside that clique, they're not. You know, the people that work in this industry are, I mean, not universally, because no industry is universally good people, but it's full of great people, friendly, welcoming people. But somehow you put it together as a whole and it becomes quite impenetrable. And that's the image change that we've got to make.
So everybody on this panel knows what I'm about to ask now, because I'm just going to turn to Jonathan. And I don't really want to dive too deeply into this particular kind of example, because I think that is for a longer discussion. But when David was just talking about a sort of sense that people are kind of unwittingly cliquey, maybe, perhaps unwittingly a little bit like, you know, people like us, kind of that kind of scenario. But you've got your two co-founders are both women who are successful in their own right, and you decided to conduct a little experiment, didn't you? And I just wonder whether you could just briefly talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So very topical. So Capslock is founded by three of us, so myself, Lorna, and Andrea Cullen. And you know, together as three co-founders, we go to business meetings, speak to investors, speak to cybersecurity employer partners on a very regular basis. And we found lots of little learned behaviours and microaggressions in terms of which negatively affected Lorna and Andrea. And what we decided to do was count the amount of times people would say our names in meetings, so either Jonathan, Lorna, or Andrea. And we've sort of we've got this tally which has been going on for about a month now, just to keep on track of it. People have said my name 79 times, Lorna's 14 times, and Andrea's just 5 times. And we're in the exact same role, in the exact same position. But I think other business leaders, other people would tend to point their questions and conversations towards me, unconsciously, mostly, because I am a male. And it's just, that's the industry. I suppose it kind of sums up the industry right now, I think, in terms of it can come across as a bit of a boys' club. So yeah, really interesting study, and we've got to keep that tally going for a little while longer and see where it goes. But I think for a male, just to point this out, you know, it's not good for anybody, because that puts a lot of additional pressure on me, a lot of extra responsibility on me as well. Whereas we should be a team of 3 with equal responsibilities. So yeah, not good for anybody at all.
And I think when you decide to come to, you know, you draw a line underneath the experiment, you should write about it, Jonathan. And although I'd love to think that, you know, thousands of people will watch this webinar on catch up, I suspect your reach and your network on LinkedIn will help magnify that. But it's a really interesting observation, isn't it? And I think it's something we all have to try and address. And I know I jokingly said, Lynn, the other day that maybe we should, actually we need to do some sort of 3-part program, documentary about dispelling the myth about cybersecurity. And so, yeah, we'll talk about that another day, maybe after this, see if we know any producer or production companies that we can tap up. But I do think something like that's needed. I think something like that is needed to demonstrate what this industry is, because I do think that there is always a chance that people will get the wrong impression, because that's often how the media portrays the sector, as David said. So we're sort of quite close to the sort of timings I had in mind, which is great. So having said all of that, talking about the skills gap and talking about how we are perceived, I think it is a good then lead into the fact that the subject of this webinar about people being the largest untapped resource for cyber resilience, and how do we make them stronger? I think it's one of those subjects where you might instinctively say, well, surely there's a technical solution to stop people being the first and last line of defense. We're putting too much pressure on people to be constantly alert to malicious activity. But anyway, so that's the sort of the next few minutes discussion. David, I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to ask you if you would just give your thoughts on that subject.
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting one. We think about people are absolutely critical, and we'll come back to that. But despite that, it's an industry that's kind of still dominated by technology. And I suppose you'd say that's self-evident because it's ones and zeros at the end of the day, but too much so. And I think there's reasons for that, of course. The people in the industry are obviously, as we've just said, technical people, maybe too much technical people. And technical people love gadgets. So we talk about gadgets, we talk about products. The vendors in the industry, the big companies are quite often product companies, and it serves their agenda well to talk about products, talk about things, talk about technologies. But actually, it isn't just about technology at all. It's about technology, process, intelligence, and above all, people. Computers don't yet go and build other computers and work without any human intervention. And so all good things and bad things that happen in this world happen because a human has made it happen or failed to prevent it happening. So it's a human business. So when I read this question, I was immediately thinking, are we talking about cyber specialists, people, what we can do with cyber specialists? Or are we talking about the rest of the workforce? And I think we're probably talking about the rest of the workforce. But it is worth saying that there is something we can do that the rest of the workforce, particularly in senior positions, can do for the cyber specialists, and that is to support them. Because actually, there's usually a small band of people in an organization charged with making it secure in cyberspace. And actually, those people need the support, and they need to be taken seriously. It's not just the support. I don't just mean pay them fairly, and I mean genuinely listen to what they're saying, and then act on the advice that they're giving, and let them shape the policies and the processes that they should be shaping. But looking at the rest of the workforce, how do you take the rest of the workforce and have them as part of your defense? How do you have them as the last line of defense? And for me, it all revolves around culture. I think you've got to generate the right level of security culture in your organization. And once you've done that, then that changes behavior. And I've previously worked in an organization where security was absolutely paramount, underpinned absolutely everything. And in that organization, you were absolutely not permitted to use USB drives. It just didn't happen, thumb drives, or anything that plugged in by USB. And such was the culture that if you'd taken away that rule, nobody would have brought them in anyway. Because I still don't use them. I'm absolutely paranoid. My behavior has been changed by that culture, that I no longer use USB drives. It just doesn't happen. And sum total of endpoints that I've infected with plugging in a USB drive is 0. So maybe it works. But you've got to judge that, because you can't just say, well, let's lock everything down, because you've got to pitch that level right. So it is about pitching that culture that suits your organization. I was having a think about this earlier today. I was thinking, well, let's have an example of that. And an example to me would be thinking insider threat and thinking somebody is walking about without the right security badge on. Now, the way that we normally try and educate our workforce is say, you should challenge that person because they're a security risk. Well, what about if you had a culture that said, this organization is absolutely welcoming, and it would be appalling for anybody to be walking around as a visitor to this organization, unsupported and unescorted. They're not being looked after. So maybe it's our culture that if anyone's walking around without the right badge on, you say, hey, a visitor. And you go and find them and you can grab them and you go and take them and get them a cup of tea and help them where do you want to go and make sure they're always escorted. You then achieve that security effect by having a culture of being something that isn't actually on the face of it to do with security.
That's interesting in a sort of workplace environment, I guess. And obviously we're in a sort of a different space now. And I think what you're saying there is about applying the right culture, and that comes from the leadership of that organization. Yeah. And that comes from, I guess, educating as well into that culture, what it is you're trying to grow, rather than perhaps having a controversial comment coming up, sort of a tick box approach to people and security awareness, but trying to change behaviors instead and doing it in a different way. Yeah. And so, Lyn, I've used the word unique once in this webinar. I'll use it just one more time. You work in a fairly unique environment. You've got, you're, I guess, thousands of lecturers and academic staff are all over the place. How on earth do you start to address the security culture of the Open University?
It is a challenge. We've got, in terms of the students, there's quite 250,000, and there is an element of the tech supports it, the way that we allow them to connect. So I think, the kind of, in sort of simple terms, what access do they have to the rest of the system? But I think the challenge is the rest of the staff, and we've got just over 4,000 lecturers who could work anywhere, and there genuinely are some in the Outer Hebrides, and they all range in their understanding of security, and they range in ages all the way up to their 80s, and so if you haven't been born in the computer age, it's almost a little bit unfair. We're employing these people to be academics, and the subjects, I would like to think, and actually STEM is probably a good example. Most of the STEM we don't have problems with, because STEM academics tend to be technology or certainly science minded. But you look at some of the other academics in the more artistic subjects, it's all about their creativity and their ability to inspire and inspire learning. So there is a real cross section. I think it's twofold for us. I think the most important thing is, if you want the population to follow a certain pattern of behaviors in order to be secure, you're much more likely to be successful if you put what they want to achieve at the heart of what you then need to do. So instead of front loading your conversation with, the security policy is this, you need to implement this, and you need to do this, or sign on the dotted line, it's actually, don't even have a conversation about security. So you had to put a little bit more effort in, what is it that you want to achieve? Okay, so you want to collaborate with these people in these conditions, and then you sort of say, okay, well, let's have a look at, and then in the background, it comes down to that risk assessment, and actually, are there actually any risks? Are we worried about it? What are they trying to do? What would happen if something went wrong? And then it's a case of, well, okay, this is how you need to do it securely, and coming back to that, we're doing this because it's going to protect not only your information, but also our students' information. In our case, personalizes it somewhat. So I think that's, for me, that those are the conversations. In some ways, the challenge is often with our own teams. And so we've got to do some work with our security professionals, helping them know how to have those conversations and not jumping to a solution, because, you know, they see a lot of risk everywhere. You know, they will instantly know where the risks are because that's their job. But it's actually holding my team back sometimes to say, just invest some time to find out what people want to achieve, and then it's a case of how we do it securely. And a few little anecdotes, you know, but it's striking that fine balance between scaremongering. But I think if you're proportionate, I mean, for me, I came in and I said, and I don't know if I completely got it right or if it was too general, but for me at the university in my first year, it's been you know, my role, as far as I can see, security is all about protecting our students, keeping them safe, enabling our staff to teach safely, and protecting our research that perhaps, you know, if we lost it or it got corrupted, you know, and then also protecting the relationships we have with our various partner organizations. And it kind of all comes down to that. So, but it's very important that so it's all about the business. So I think the more you can personalize it in some respects, the better. I'd hold back with the scaremongering stories, but some good anecdotes and really thinking through what's the worst thing that can happen. And then the solution follows, you know, and the solution may be a product, but it may also be a procedure. So I think there's a mixture. I also just would add, I think in this kind of technology world that we live in, especially when everybody started working from home, there is that false impression that technology is security and security is technology. But actually, information security in particular, guarding against the cyber threat, is so much more than that. So things like, you know, a good access log, you know, a good briefing note, you know, education and things like that. That's also really good security. You don't have to put the tech around it. And I think it's helping people understand how their activities contribute to security. And then, you know, as David's talked about the culture, then hopefully that will all come together and the result will be a tangibly better culture, and people just think, do you know what, it feels secure here, I like it. It's in my world.
Collaborating with your staff over security has got to be the way forward, hasn't it, to take them along with you. So maybe as a final almost an anecdote in itself, actually, Jonathan, I just want to come to you finally. Your degree was in nuclear engineering. And you said something quite funny off air, if you like, about what you observed when you were studying nuclear engineering, and then you ended up jumping into the cybersecurity space, and then it just took off. So could you just sort of wrap up by just giving us your example about that?
Yeah. So sort of between 2012 and 2014, I took a nuclear engineering degree at Lancaster University. I was one of 8 on that course. And, you know, what we were learning was pretty sensitive. And all of the students, we just got phishing email after phishing email to our both personal and to our academic inboxes. And looking back now from where I am, you know, there was no security awareness. We weren't told about this at all. But, you know, it could very much have been, you know, if I was dreaming a dream, it could have been a state actor after, you know, some nuclear engineering secrets from Lancaster Uni. You just never know, right? So, yeah, really interesting. But they didn't touch upon, you know, information security culture and awareness at all back then. And you would hope now in 2021, maybe it would be a topic which would be addressed. But, yeah, absolutely fascinating.
So we have to sort of draw this to a close, but honestly, I think some of these subjects we could really talk for a much longer period. So we have got, it's more of an observation than a question. And Christine, who asked the question before we'd even started the webinar, which is pretty impressive, has got an observation, and this is related to AI actually. And so she has said, are you aware that programmers, developers tend to produce work which has their bias inbuilt? Therefore, the result is that AI systems are being developed by men and are showing anti-women characteristics. And so we've heard about Jonathan's experiments and David's observations as well. And that's really, I think it's a really interesting point, Christine. So thank you very much for making it. I can, as I say, we can offload that type of discussion for another session, I think. But it is really interesting how all of this is so connected with diversity, inclusion, equality, and we need to change, and we need to reach out and make ourselves more, I think, more accessible as a sector. So I'm going to wrap up there. I'd really like to thank Lyn. I've said your name several times now with Jonathan's experiment, to Jonathan and to David for giving up your time and joining us. And also thank you to all of you for watching. It's been really interesting to be part of this, and I hope that you will take these debates into your own workplaces as you leave the webinar. So we'll be back with another episode of the Big Three soon on a separate topic to be decided. And until then, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.